Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Learning with Jelly. So, today we're going to get into that part two of how to utilize pandas for our data analysis. So, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so on the agenda for today, we're going to learn how to rename columns. We're also going to check for duplicated data because that can affect our analysis. And then also how to filter our data using .iloc or .loc indexers. So, just a quick review from the first part about the data that we're looking at. I highly encourage that if you did not look at the first video, it's going to be linked in the description below. So the data set is going to be this students.csv file, and it is a fictional data set from Kaggle. The goal is to analyze the probability of a student applying for grad school. So the race field in the data set is censored, but still may be useful. They have information about math scores and overall academic performance. And they also have columns called Form 1 to Form 4 that represents a student background. The target variable is Y, where we're going to put a 0 if they failed to apply for grad school, 1 if they applied within their country, and 2 if they applied abroad. So this notebook is going to be on the GitHub repo in the description, so feel free to look at this data before the analysis. All right, so the first things first, just like we learned in part one, we need to import this Pandas package. Pandas is a powerful package in Python that allows for data manipulation and data analysis. So I'm going to import Pandas as PD. PD is an alias, so I don't have to keep typing Pandas every time. And I'm going to run that. The next thing that we're going to do is actually read in that data set. And if you have cloned down my GitHub repo, this data set is within our data folder. So I'm going to do PD, which saying go to that pandas package, take out that read underscore CSV function, and then I'm going to pass in the path in quotes so that I'm able to read in that data. And I'm going to go ahead and store it as an object called students because everything in Python is an object. Okay, so in part one, this is just a quick review. We learned how to look at the data before we do anything. So .head is going to be that method that allows us to look at the first 5 observations of our data. And we see here that we have ID, which is going to refer to a student's ID, the class that they were in. It can either be A or B, gender, race, overall GPA, math scores, those background information in Form 1 to Form 4, and then this target variable of 0, 1, and 2 about if they applied within their home country, or if they applied abroad. All right, so the first thing or the next thing that we want to do is actually rename some columns. And I have linked the documentation in this notebook that you can also take a look at. But real quickly, let's see how this function works. So I'm going to call the object called students because that's where our data is stored, and then .rename. And .rename is going to take a parameter called columns, and that columns parameter is going to be a dictionary. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the data type of dictionary, that's also going to be linked in the description below. But you can see that I'm renaming the column Y to be applied to grad school because I want that to be descriptive so people actually know what that column is. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And now I'm also going to rename that ID column to students ID. So let's go ahead and do it together. So I'm going to call where my data is stored. It's stored in the students object. I'm going to do students.rename, call up that columns parameter, and I'm going to put a dictionary. So the old column is going to be on the left. The new column name is going to be on the right. So I'm going to say ID, and then I want to rename that to student underscore ID. And it's always best practice to try not to have spaces in column names. All of that gets a little finicky. All right, so we have that there. So now let's actually check the head of our data set to see if it's working. So I'm going to call that dot head, and as you can see, the student ID is now renamed from ID. And then if I scroll all the way over, that Y is now renamed to applied grad school. So we definitely want to use that rename function when we want to rename columns. Our next step is going to be check for duplicates. And it's very important to check for duplicates, okay? Because say, for instance, you're dealing with transaction data, the number of times a customer comes to your store. Maybe it is one row per customer with all of its transactions as columns. Or maybe a customer can have multiple rows, one for each transaction. So row one would be their purchase in June. Row two would be their purchase in August, in September, and so forth. And so knowing if there's duplicates can tell you if you need to aggregate the data up, if you have to make transformations on the data, or if you need to drop any duplicates. And we're going to do this with the dot duplicated method, which also has the documentation here. So let's just look at it. So I'm going to check to see if there's any duplicated IDs because there's only supposed to be one student per row. And I should only have a unique student every row. I should not have Jelly coming in on row 2 and Jelly coming in on row 5. So I want to check that. So let's see how this duplicated method works. So we're going to call out that student's object. And with that student's object, I want to check if there's duplication. So I'm going to go ahead and call that subset. And inside of brackets, I'm going to call the column that I want to check for duplicates for. Most of the time, you're going to use a unique column where every row has a unique number in it. I know that the student ID should be unique by student, so I can check if Jelly shows up twice in the data set. Versus if I use the Algebra 1 scores, it's highly likely that a student could have the same Algebra 1 scores as another student. So I'm going to call the dot duplicated, and it's going to give me false or true, where it's going to be false if it isn't a duplicate and true if it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and add another function at the bottom of this. So it says add a dot sum at the end for any true value. So let me do a dot sum. And I see when I do dot sum, there's 0 duplications in my data set. So that's like a nice little trick on how you can add that aggregate method on top of that duplicated method to kind of sum up to see how many duplicates you have. All right, so the next thing, and probably one of the most common uses when we're doing analytics, is to be able to filter our data. And there's 2 types of filtering that we can do. We could do .iloc, which is integer-based filtering, or .loc, which is label-based filtering. Both of these are indexers, so they're going to be surrounded by brackets, okay? They're going to be surrounded by brackets, not parentheses. iloc is going to take in the number of the row. So say, for instance, you want to filter for row 4, column 2. You're going to say iloc 4, comma 2. .loc is going to be the title or the label. So in this case, if I wanted to return all rows, but I only wanted to return the student ID, I can put in student ID in this second argument. A colon is used when we want to select everything. And so definitely take some time to look at the documentation there for the difference between iloc and loc. So let's go ahead and look at this. So I'm going to go ahead and check the head again. You can't do a dot head enough to see what it actually looks like. And I am going to do some filtering. So I want to filter for the ID, the class, and the algebra columns. I remember that I renamed ID to student ID. So I'm just going to put a student underscore here. And notice that I do a .loc. This colon means return every row, all the rows. And then I do a column and a comma. And as a list, I'm passing through the features of the columns that I want. I only want student ID, the class, and algebra. And it gives that right back to me, the student ID, class, and algebra, right? Another way, I'm going to just go ahead and check the .info, see what's going on here. .info is another powerful method that we learned in part 1 because it's going to tell us the data types that we have, any missing observations. In this case, we have 105 rows and 105 filled in values, so nothing is missing. And it's also going to get us a quick look at the index that every column is at, right? So say for instance, I wanted to do .iloc, and instead of calling the column names, I wanted to call the column numbers. So index 0 is student ID, index 1 up here is class, and index 5 is algebra. So I can have the same thing returned by calling in the indexes. So iloc means integer base. You're going to filter based off of numbers. Loc is just labels. You're going to use the label of the column. So now we're going to use iloc to select the first 2 rows in column. So I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to do students.iloc. It's an indexer, so brackets. I'm going to go and hit 0:1, right? And 0:2, because it's going to be up to but not including, and 0:2. And so when I do that, I select the first 2 rows in column. So this last number is up to but not including. So it's going to select index 0, index 1, but it's not going to select index 2. So Python has this weird thing where it indexes at 0. Once you get used to it, you'll start realizing it, okay? But up to and not including 2. So now let's look at how to filter our data more. So in this case, say for instance, I wanted to create a data frame that is only specific for students of a class. I can still use .loc. So in this case, I'm going to have those brackets. I'm going to call the column of the data frame and set it equal to the value that I want to filter for. So in this case, I can see at a quick glance when I do a .head that I'm only looking at class of A, which is exactly what I want. Okay. I can also combine these two where I can do a .loc on 2 conditions. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this line. Let's go ahead and copy, and I'm going to replace this none block. And I am going to, inside this indexer, put the first filtering criteria in parentheses. And I'm going to want to filter for race equals 2. So I'm going to say students, race, and then I'm going to have that equal to 2. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do the new data underscore race dot head to kind of look at the data to see if it actually filtered. Oops. So students class equals A. Oh, I forgot to put this in parentheses. No problem. We're going to fix that right there. And here that I have filtered down to where the class is A and the race is 2. So anytime when I want to filter on more than one condition, I'm going to call the .loc. Each condition I'm going to put in a set of parentheses. And is going to be the ampersand, and or is going to be that pipe that's right above that backslash on your keyboard. Okay. So nice little filtering. It was already done here for us. All right. So we were able to rename things. We were able to also look for duplications as well as filter our data. So some great summary takeaways. Once again, Pandas is this great package for data exploration. Everything in Python is an object, and these objects have specific methods and attributes that we can call on. Rename is going to rename those columns. Don't forget to check for your duplicates, and .iloc and loc are great for filtering your data set. So that is all. Thank you for tuning in with Learning with Jelly, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.